welcome to another show of Inspirate. The theme for this season is around this new socio-economic paradigm, or redesigning a new economic world that we live in. We have, as humanity, living in unprecedented times. Did we ever think that a pandemic such as COVID-19 would come and really upset every facet of our lives, from a social perspective, politically, economically, individually, from a spiritual perspective? It has impacted every facet of our lives. And how are we able to usher in something new, something that is different from what has gotten us to this point? If we look around us, we see the ravages of the economic world we lived in. We see this gap between the rich and the poor, this income inequality. We see job losses. We see heartache amongst people. Surely this world that we live in cannot continue the way it has. This of creating an abundance for a few and leaving the masses of our people the world over in abject poverty, in a situation where they're surviving. On this particular show, on our Zoom call, we have two esteemed guests. We have Shahira Kala. Shahira Kala, for those that don't know, has been very prominent in student politics, has been very vociferous around the plight of workers at Wits University, around the plight of students in terms of getting a fair education and affordable education. We also welcome Shahira.
Thank you so much for having me.
We also have in studio, well, not in studio, but on Zoom, Dr. Iraj Abedian. Dr. Iraj has been very, very involved in policy making from an economic perspective for the last 26 years, has been very fortunate to be involved with the first political dispensation or democratic dispensation in South Africa under the Madiba presidency. In terms of formulating economic policy, has gone through the various presidencies, the various ebbs and flows of our economy since democracy. A person who comes from very humble beginnings, who's walked our rural areas, who studied out in the Eastern Cape, and understands the plight of the poor, as well as understanding economics from a strategic perspective. Let me start by this here. How have we gotten to the situation we're in? I mean, we as South Africans, at the advent of democracy, knew that there was this gap between the haves and the have-nots. We had some of the greatest policies, yet 26 years later, we're still grappling with this income inequalities, this Gini coefficient they talk about. Dr. Iraj, I'll start with you. How have we gotten to this particular situation?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity and for the kind words. And it's wonderful to see Shahira again. In terms of how we got here, if you're going to reduce it to one short sentence, it's human ethics went off the rail. Leadership, particularly political leadership, as well as business leadership, lost sight of the strategic, most important, and most ethical objectives of democratic transition. Democratic transition was a means to eliminating disparities and injustices of the past. Instead, very shortly after the transition, I would say within 4 to 5 to 6 years, the focus began to change. And we see the consequences now. And that's the short answer. We can go to a lot of technical analysis, but at the end of it, it's the loss of ethical focus.
And that is exactly what the theme of this session is about ushering in a soul-based economy, if there is such a term. Many people, many skeptics will say economics by its very nature is so mechanistic in its nature that how can we even talk soul-based? It's almost an oxymoron, it's talking about the soul-based economy. Shahira, from your perspective, a young lady who has experienced quite a bit. I know the time in 2015 with the issues around the fees must fall movement. You've seen it on the ground. The youth, is challenged in terms of socially as well as economically. How have we gotten to this particular situation?
Yeah, I think I would agree with Dr. Abedin that there's no simple answer to that question. But it really got me thinking when the topic of a soul economy was presented to us to discuss today, that when the transition was taking place, Madiba himself had said that it's not enough to have an RDP. We need an RDP of the soul. So when we talk about a soul economy, we need to think about how we can create that in a society that is based very little on soul, a culture that is very distant from social connectivity, which is based on human solidarity, on global justice, on internationalism, the kind of values that we need if we are to recover from this moment that we find ourselves in. And the pandemic itself, we can argue, has been a result of capitalist accumulation that has come at the expense of the planet. So we need to discuss what the climate justice means in this context of a soul economy. And I'm really interested in the way we're going to move forward. I think our history is important. We need to understand it. We need to appreciate the complexities and the nuances, the compromises that indeed were made at the time because of necessity. But I'm more interested in the cultural aspect, the social aspect. As an undergrad studying economic science at Wits University, I always felt a little bit like the economics as a subject was quite devoid from those deeper questions, was very behind the humanities in asking what does value mean and how is value created and who is it created for? So I'm looking to get into those questions today.
Yes, but at the same time, I hear what you guys are saying in terms of where we've lost our way. But at the same time, when we think back and you think it's just yesterday, 26 years ago has just flown by, Dr. Abedian, in terms of that rebirth in 1994, that excitement, and the ticket that our movement came with was on this moral regeneration, on this ethical leadership. We witnessed a previous regime which was an antithesis of morality. Is it, and I'm hearing Shahira also talk about this economic system, is it the very nature of this global economic system that sort of by its very nature permeates this soulless, this non-ethical, non-morality aspect, that even though I may be somebody that as a leader has great intent, I end up just fitting into a system that just devoids myself from this ethics and morality. Dr. Iraj?
Yeah, Yusuf, there's no question that over the past 200 years, economics and commerce and business practices have become more and more secular. Secularity, meaning accumulation of material things, rates of growth, have become indicators of success. So there's no question about it, and it has more and more created a gap between human values and materialistic accumulation. Having said that, at every point in time, including the very moment that we discuss, human beings have got choices to make. We are fully aware that this is the case, but we don't have to become part of it. In fact, if we are a bit more determined, we can use exactly the same dynamics of a materialistic economic framework or socio-economic framework to turn it into an engine of achieving socio-ethical objectives of closing the gap between the have and have not, using economic forces to deliver, using technology to reach more of people, and so on and so forth. So we cannot blame the system. The system clearly is part of the problem, but economic and political leadership choices at the end of the day either exacerbate systemic problems or uses the systemic dynamics to achieve socio-political objectives that are fairness and conducive to social equitability and fairness.
No, great. I mean, you're speaking about choice, and we've come to the end of segment one. Let's discuss the choices that we have. And I'd like to start off with Shahira. You were very vociferous about what can we do differently, and let's explore this. The choices we have with the soul-based economy, this that has these moral ethics, values, and bringing in that human element to an economic system. Immediately after the break, we'll get into that. Welcome back to Inspirate, and we have two esteemed guests on Zoom. We have Dr. Iraj Abedian, who's the Chief Economist of Pan-African Advisory Services. We have Shahira Kala, a student activist, and now involved with some philanthropic work in terms of using technology to impact communities. We were talking just before the break around this soul-based economy. Is it possible? Can we bring morality, ethics, or have we as humanity gone so far adrift in terms of the mechanistics of the economic system? Dr. Iraj, you mentioned this choice. At the end of the day, as humanity, as spiritual beings, as people or God-fearing, the gift and the difference between us and the rest of planet Earth is the fact that we have been given this choice to do the right thing. Shahira, your perspective on are we able to create this soul-based economy?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be naive to believe that we can create a soul-based economy as an island on our own in South Africa. Because of the nature of how globalized our world is, and particularly our financial globalization, we do form part of a world system. And if we want to have a different reality and trajectory for ourselves in South Africa, that has to be part of a vision that is global and that is based on progressive internationalism. And I just wanted to say that I'm not involved in philanthropic work, but I am involved in community-driven social impact work. And I think we have a lot to learn from communities who have been on the margins on the kind of world that needs to be created. Often people say that Ubuntu doesn't exist in our economy or in our society, but you just have to look at the way in which people on the margins who have been surviving on very little share and live together and are able to overcome things that we would never be able to conceptualize, and that they shouldn't be having to overcome so long after our democratic transition. What's really interesting, since this is a platform that is for Muslims, I guess, and broader society, Dr. Bilal Wari says that for a lot of Muslims, capitalism is their religion and Islam is their ritual observance. And when I heard this quote, it stopped me in my tracks, particularly when I was thinking about the outreach work that's been happening during the pandemic and what our conceptualization of zakat actually is in South Africa and the world over. So this has got me thinking critically about the role of philanthropy, about the role of charity, and instead the focus that needs to shift more to organizing our societies and our communities in more resilient ways. So that's something that I'll get into in the next segment.
You know, you were saying something around consciousness, and I want to just get around that. A very spiritual person once told me that, and if you look at our constitution as well, I mean, I think when you look at this constitution that was created, I think just before the advent of democracy, or just about that time, we prided ourselves on the fact that we have one of the best constitutions in the world, which I believe had got a lot of soul in that constitution. And a spiritual person said that somehow South Africa holds the consciousness for the world. Isn't this our gift that we can provide? The fact that we've come from such a polarized history, being able to unite in a very peaceful way. I mean, there has been obviously bumps along the way, but in the main, and Dr. Iraj, you've been witnessing South Africa since, you were a youngster as a student, out in the rural areas in the Eastern Cape, where they embraced you with such love, being somebody that's a foreigner. Surely that's, and Shahira talks about Ubuntu, surely we should be, I mean, Ubuntu by its very nature is morality, is ethics, is I am because of my neighbor. Surely we shouldn't be having this discussion about morality and ethics. We should be providing this as gifts to the world. Dr. Iraj?
Yeah, I 100% agree. I mean, I could one day hopefully write a book about this point of Ubuntu in action. And as we speak, in very many of our poorer communities, this reciprocity, this support, cohesion does exist amongst the poor, interestingly enough. But when people get rich and they get into the materialistic side of the new dispensation, somehow they lose connection with their soul, with their values. They talk about it, but they don't do it. That's why the constitution that we have captured a lot of the embedded soul elements of this society from all its diverse backgrounds. And yet we have failed over the past quarter of a century to give expression to many of its ideals. On economics specifically, I think the good news is, whilst I fully agree with Shahira that we are not an island on our own and we cannot do everything in our own way, at the same time, globally, there is a very powerful trend towards revising this mainstream objectives of economics and finance. There is a whole trend of very young, energetic, just like Shahira and her colleagues, who are saying this system is not working, it's not sustainable, we got to revise it. The whole the impact investment, the care for the environment, increasingly, not the mainstream, I must emphasize, but alongside the mainstream, in my view, a more powerful stream is emerging, driven by the youth, driven by technology, enabled by the capacity to share ideals and ethics across the globe, across nations, races, religions, etc., etc. That is a very exciting development at the moment, which wants to transform economics, transform finance, transform the way businesses and corporates operate. And under that pressure, it's putting pressure on the political leadership. There is a trend which I find it very exciting. I agree it's going to be a tough road, but it's a good battle to fight.
And in many ways, this was brewing. I think even pre-COVID, I think what COVID has done is as this duality, right? This dichotomy, in a sense that it's created a lot of heartache, and we know we've lost, close family members, etc. And there's been job losses. But at the same time, there's also a positive, in a sense that it perhaps has acted as a catalyst to galvanize this movement that you're talking about. That, yes, may still be in the minority, but the likes of Shahira's and this youth that's got the zest and care and absolute empathy for those that are downtrodden and uplifting them and almost gives you a sort of hope Shaira, from your perspective, being on the ground, you say you're doing a lot of community work. How are you finding this since COVID in terms of, is that the energy that is being felt?
Yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, the solidarity of communities in this moment of crisis has been extremely inspiring. And we've seen throughout our history that people have a tendency to come together. Yesterday, unfortunately, we lost one of the greatest lights of this example, Advocate George Bizos, who
yes.
was such an amazing legal, professional, human rights lawyer, but also, just an activist in the most amazing way. And these examples are really important for us to acknowledge. Many times when people ask me this question about the situation on the ground in communities, what I would like to focus on is not them being downtrodden, but them being systematically looted. Firstly by colonialism, then by apartheid, and then by state capture, and the corruption that we still see is ongoing through the pandemic. And that has been the most heartbreaking thing to witness. The food packages, we haven't heard accountability for that. The COVID grant that hasn't been fully implemented, more than half of the people who applied haven't received it. So what I'm trying to do with the work on the C19 People's Coalition, with a lot of progressive organizations and people, is to focus on what we have to build. And this has been long coming, even from the Fees Must Fall movement. It's important to focus on what you're against and what needs to come down, but it's equally important to focus on what kind of system and world you want to create. And I think young people are increasingly doing that. I'm even getting old in this space. The Gen Zs are taking over and are really leading us in that sense. But we need to be the ones who radically question things like odious debt. The global economic balance sheet is built on odious debt. If we look at history, we consider Haiti. They were held at gunpoint by France to pay for former slave owners compensation for the loss of their property. And that was a monumental economic crime. And these economic crimes have continued to this day. We're talking about debt again. We haven't considered ESCOM and the odious debt there. The World Bank itself admitted that the loans to ESCOM were actually rife with corruption and they shouldn't have been approved. But still, we're not challenging these things. We're not challenging the World Bank. We're not challenging the IMF. We're not challenging these systems, and we need to be doing that. We need to be the voice at the forefront of that. Debt, like everything, is very political, and we have a role to play in these conversations.
I mean, we just heard today that I think Moody's is saying that we could be touching, I think 80% of our GDP would be, the portion of debt would be 80% contributing to to our GDP. So that becomes a major impact. But immediately after the break, we've come to the end of our segment. Immediately after the break, what I would like to talk about is Shaira, you mentioning this new paradigm, people wanting to see how can we do things differently, how can we bring this soul-based economy. I think let's get down into some of how this world will look with the soul-based economy. See you immediately after the break. Welcome back to Inspirate, the show that's here to inspire, empower, and enlighten you. We're talking a soul-based economy, this intriguing conversation that we've been having over the last two segments. Dr. Iraja Badian from Pan-African Advisory Services and Sister Shahira Kala. Shahira, just before the break, you were mentioning that, being involved in community development, there's obviously this real challenges that people are facing, poverty, and when we see it, we just see it just around us. I think maybe before COVID, maybe we became immune to it all. And I think what COVID did is come and actually made us more acutely aware of all of it around us. So we're now looking at people, as you come out of your homes, your palatial homes, and then you see people struggling. Yet at the same time, we know that there's always hope. We have to look at what our strengths are. We talked of our Ubuntu-ness in Africa, in South Africa. We look at our natural resources. Africa particularly has been blessed with natural wealth in terms of resources. Yes, that has been looted. Shahira, you mentioned, exploited to the advantage of those in the Northern Hemisphere predominantly. We have this amazing large youth talent that's untapped. Yes, has been in many ways lost in a sense that have we given enough in terms of education? So using what we have, this strong youth, this Ubuntu element, the fact that we came out of a peaceful dispensation as we transitioned into democracy. If we take this and build this soul-based economy, are we able to do it, and how would it look like, Dr. Abedian?
I think we need to break it down, the answer to various pieces. A soul-based economy would have very conscientious and alert consumers to begin with, because that's a major power that all of us have. We make sure that we consume things that are not abusive of human rights and abuses of the environment, and not necessarily things that we could produce here and we are not producing them, and we substitute them with imports. So at the core of a soul-based economy is a conscientious individual that makes choices consciously based on values and ethical values. Next to it is business operations. Remember, the common element of consumption, production, politics, and policy is human beings. Unless we get the human beings to center itself on consciousness and be aware of the choices that need to be ethical, this need to be consistent and conducive to a fair system, you're not going to make much progress. Companies don't operate on autopilot. Companies have got managers and CEOs and boards. So human beings are at the center of it. So companies have to be part of re-engineering themselves to be part of this soul-based ethical economic behavior in terms of choices that they make in their production processes, the wages that they pay, the wage gap that they are allowed to tolerate or prepare to tolerate, profiteering that they make at the expense of the society and the environment, taxes that they do not pay, etc., etc. At the same time, a soul-based economy, and I think Shahira alluded to this before, unless the system is conducive to fairness and ethical conduct, individuals have scope, but the scope is limited. So we need to have a governmental system, a regulatory system that controls and regulates the economy and the society towards fairness. State capture is an extreme daylight looting of the poor's resources. But we need to go to the other extreme of people wanting to be in government, not to loot, but to serve. So we need to again make leadership in corporate, leadership in governments inverted. Not that I want to get to the seat of power to abuse and to benefit my network and my family and my party. I want to get in charge so as to serve the society. And I think these are some of the parameters that we need to discuss. We need to put systems in place to monitor them and therefore transform the culture of economic and political economy from control and command to service and reciprocity within the society.
Yes, and that's quite profound because, if we take our Abrahamic religions and the philosophies that underpin, the major religions, it's all about servant leadership. There were so many greats that came through, the prophets that came through, that all taught us servant leadership. Has it been because we've gotten so mechanistic, so material, so demand, or just focused on consumerism, that almost that humanity has been lost, and so it's to reclaim that. I think everyone can, no matter how lost we have been, we all have this goodness in us. I think everyone has this intention to do good and to make some sort of positive impact on this earth. Shahira, your perspective on that?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. We need to be the ones, I think, that radically oppose the patent laws that stop people from accessing life-saving medications. We need to be the ones who have a position on the commodification of our natural resources and land. And particularly when it comes to the historical injustice of land in South Africa, we as Muslims in this country need to be at the forefront of this issue, because Allah says in the Quran in Surah Qasas that the oppressed must be the inheritors of the land. And we wish to be gracious to those who are being oppressed in the land, to make them leaders and make them heirs and inheritors of the land. And from how we ourselves are positioned on the Palestinian issue, right? We agree that Palestine needs to be free from the river to the sea, and that is important, that international solidarity as South Africans, as oppressed people, that solidarity means a lot to the world. But if we can't show that same solidarity to our own communities, and the conception of what, who is deemed our community and who's deemed not our community, those fundamentals, that social connectivity is what is going to make it possible for us to create a soul-based society, which will make it possible for us to build a soul-based economy. Because you can't have a soul-based economy without a soul-based society.
And you bring in this point, which I think has been brandished quite a lot, especially, I know our President Cyril Ramaphosa has mentioned it as well, this inclusiveness, this of bringing all facets of our society together. Isn't that our fundamental challenge? Is how do we bring big business, or what we term a white monopoly capital? We have that whole narrative discussion between that versus radical economic transformation, and how do we bring all facets of society, including civil society, including the faith-based organizations, galvanizing around creating this ethical economic system. Dr. Iraj?
Yeah, I think it requires a very open resetting of indicators of success. At the moment, indicators of success, for example, for individuals is how much they accumulate, what car they drive, what clothes brand they wear, where they live, etc., etc. For companies is profitability. For different stakeholders in the society, indicators have become themselves materialistic and secular. We need to change indicators of success to how much of our life we put into giving to the society. Production is important, money is important, but how you earn money is even more important, and how you use money that you have earned is even more important. So if we change the conversation, if we change the indicators, and it's not going to happen automatically, it is going to require very sustained focus and conversations. And again, I'm more encouraged as I get older by the energy and the zeal of the youth who are questioning these things across the globe. So if we change them, we'll begin to see, for example, companies not priding because how much profit they made, but how they've made that profit. Their profit is less, but they've been kinder to their workers. They've been kinder to the environment. They've contributed to the community. A corporate may make less profit, but the reason they made less profit is because they connected with the supply chain in the local economy to support the small businesses, the small producers, the small manufacturers, small suppliers of services. Yes, it cut to their margin, but the profit that they made is far more consistent with a fair society, with a sustainable community and reciprocal coexistence on a human terms, as opposed to these extremes of wealth and poverty. So it requires that type of reimagining the economy, reimagining ourselves, and redefining indicators of success for all the stakeholders in the society.
Yeah, on that important note, reimagining the economy, reimagining ourselves as this choice, it always comes back to ourselves. We can, if we change our attitudes, our values, then so it actually permeates into the rest of the economy. And then, of course, as you mentioned, the indicators. What are our value systems? If it's just about accumulation of wealth and then hiding that money into all these tax havens and hiding the money away from the tax authorities, then we can't sit and complain about government and business when it all starts with ourselves. Immediately after the break, we'll get down to how we see South Africa, let's say in the next 5 years. And I'd love to hear that from our guests.
You inspire me to be the best. You inspire me to be the best.
Welcome back to Inspirate. We've come to the last segment of this topic around designing a new socio-economic paradigm, specifically talking to Dr. Iraj Abedian as well as Shaira Kala around a soul-based economy. And we've had some insightful conversation around the individual versus this economic structure that has been prevalent over the last 200 years. And Dr. Iraj was mentioning that he is very hopeful, given the fact that you have this youth, the zeal of the youth he mentioned, that is coming with morality, coming with on this beacon of change, that we can't be continuing the way we have been to date. And now I'll go to Shaira. Shaira, you would be termed a millennial, Generation Y, they call it. And I found it interesting as we were speaking that we actually have 3 generations represented here. You have Generation X, which I think I fall in, and then you have a baby boomer, I think, is Dr. Iraj. So it will be interesting to hear your perspectives around, let's take South Africa, right? And if I were allowed to provide you with a crystal ball and said, in 5 years' time, I mean, a lot of people are talking about we could end up as a failed state. With all our great rebirth in 1994, we could end up just, and many people are talking about that. They use the term, we'll end up like Zimbabwe, and I don't want to go into that, but we know what we're talking about, right? Will we end up in a failed state, or do you see it differently, Shaira?
It's a sunnah to be a radical optimist. So I'm going to not entertain those very pessimistic visions. Of course, we find ourselves having a lot of fear and uncertainty about the future, but it's in our hands. We have to make something of the situation we're in. And, if I could think about South Africa in 5 years' time, I'm hoping that we'll be over the hurdle of having to try and fit ourselves into a global system that is built for us to fail. I hope that we will not prioritize in economic growth that is destructive to the environment and to the very planet that we live in. I hope that we will prioritize the decommodification and the decolonization of our education systems, that we prioritize adult education as well. Because of our history, many people have actually not been able to have the privilege of getting an education. And that has affected us in multiple ways. The sociological fabric of our society has been affected by the fact that a lot of people haven't had access to quality education. And I'd like to see us prioritize dignified housing and land redistribution without compensation. So my vision is quite a radical one. There might be disagreements about its realistic but I think that we can't afford to be conservative about what needs to happen in the future. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. And there are many people who are committed to be part of this global zeitgeist that is questioning what value is, that is understanding from a more decolonial perspective, a reconceptualized theory of value, about inequality, who earns what and why, about GDP, how it's actually calculated and why it's calculated in that way, about our governance of organizations, how are these systems produced, and about the pricing of medicines and life-saving resources. Is it accessible? About digital platforms, who owns our data, and also about the role of the state, because we can talk about not putting money in tax havens, but if you have a state that's going to loot your money that you earn very hard, you put in a lot of work to earn, and then needs to be redistributed, that doesn't instill a lot of faith in the system. So these are the major challenges, I think, for us to have a future that is not a failed state.
Yeah, you said something very profound. It's the sunnah to have a radical hope, and I love that. Moving that ball, that crystal ball, and handing it over to you, Dr. Iraj, would we, the doomsayers are saying that, the skeptics say that we on a road to a failed state. I think people said that in 1994 as well. All right, I remember people collecting, food and so on at the advent of democracy. Are we at that precipice again? The doomsayers get, or can we do what we did in '94, and really shut those doomsayers down? Dr. Iraj?
Yeah, I don't subscribe to that for the following reasons. Nothing is automatic, but if the DNA or the culture of this society is anything to go by, and that's all that we have to work with, we have a very activist society. We have a generation like Shahira and even older than Shahira who understand the value of social activism. And even when the corrupt and the abusers get hold of power, social activism, which is part of human consciousness, by the way, in action, stops that. And yes, it's tough, as it was tough under apartheid. It was tough to make a lot of things under apartheid. It's tough to turn things around as we have been looted. But it's not impossible. And I see a lot of activism amongst the youth. I can also see some new layer of political leadership that has the right ambitions. We need to support that. We also see a rise in the society, in religious organizations, in various groupings within the society that has become alert to the fact that you cannot be complacent. You cannot say, well, so-and-so is in power, so let's do nothing. That lesson cost us a lot. So given our constitution, given the DNA of our society, and very importantly, given the incredible resourcefulness of this economy, I'm hopeful and actively involved to the extent that I can as a human being to make sure that we come out of the hole that we found ourselves. And the majority of the population at the moment is on that track. They don't get enough airtime, and it's unfortunate. They don't come together enough. That is necessary to rectify. But all in all, I do not subscribe that we are on an inevitable downhill, as the doomsdayers say.
And I think that is obviously very refreshing based on the fact that both guests, both panelists are very actively involved, in this redesigning of a socio-economic paradigm. I know, Dr. Iraj, you very actively involved, guiding, advising government, big business around policies, around its implementation. And I guess you'd be bringing in this ethical leadership, this human consciousness in action that we speak about, to then usher in the soul-based economy. And then, of course, Shaira, I know you as a social activist, very passionate about the issues and plights of the oppressed people all around the globe, including Africa, including our communities, and doing this active work in our communities. Of course, with that, you'd be making a major impact. And of course, if we can all, take these principles and adopt these principles in our lives, we all can make a major impact. I think the lesson that has come out very strongly from the guests is that the power lies with us. Shahira mentioned that as Muslims, as people of the book, our role is to be able to have this hope, this radical hope. It was the greatest example from our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Despite all the doom and gloom that he faced, he then transformed an entire economy, an entire society. Thank you, Shahira. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Dr. Iraj Abedian, from your busy and hectic schedule. It was a highly insightful conversation. I hope you as the listener enjoyed this and has taken something and has inspired me, for example, to be able to do much more than I'm doing in my own way. On that note, we like to thank our collaborators that we work with, the Movement for a United South Africa, Musa, as well as from the Inspirate team, as well as ITV. Thank you, and we wish to have you on many other of our series on redesigning, on recreating a new socio-economic paradigm. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.